Jake stood frozen as the clerk sneered, "No military discounts, and you don't belong here." The cold sting of humiliation cracked his pride in front of strangers. The mall fell silent, but this was only the spark. What happened next would ignite a fire no one saw coming. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jake Mason's hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight as the words hung heavy in the stale air of the electronics store. The flicker of fluorescent lights above seemed harsher now, spotlighting the simmering humiliation burning inside him. He glanced down at the worn patches on his jacket, the emblem of his infantry unit, faded from sun and sweat, a badge of honor earned through endless nights in hostile deserts. They weren't just decorations, they were a testament to sacrifice, to standing between chaos and the safety of strangers. Yet here, in this sterile suburban mall, they might as well have been invisible. Ethan, the clerk, barely raised his gaze, his smirk a cruel mirror of the bitterness Jake sensed beneath. This wasn't merely disdain. It was a barricade forged by years of hardship, economic despair, and the misunderstandings that so often cloak veterans in shadows of suspicion. Ethan's youth was marked by struggle. He had watched neighbors lose jobs, families fracture under the weight of hardship, and heard stories blaming the military for draining resources or disrupting lives. The clerk's snide dismissal wasn't a personal vendetta. It was a symptom of a community wounded and confused, where anger often misfires. Jake inhaled slowly, the breath heavy in his lungs as he fought the urge to lash out. His daughter's birthday was hours away. He needed a gift, a small piece of normalcy to bring back home after months away in a foreign land. But instead of kindness, he met scorn. Around them, shoppers' heads turned, whispers bubbling beneath the hum of air conditioning and distant pop music. The mall, a place meant for families and smiles, felt suddenly hostile. A stage where Jake's dignity was stripped away in front of strangers who might never understand the battles he'd fought beyond these walls. Still, Jake tried one last time to reach through the bitterness. "I served to protect people like you," he said, voice calm but resolute, eyes searching Ethan's face for a flicker of understanding. "Not for rewards or thanks, just to make sure you're safe." Ethan's laugh was sharp, hollow. "Safe? Maybe you're safe sitting behind that counter judging me," he sneered. "If you don't want to hear the truth, then maybe you don't belong here." The words were knives, but Jake swallowed the urge to retaliate. Instead, a cold rage settled deep in his chest, the kind that burned slow and steady, fueled by injustice and disbelief. His mind raced, memories flashing, comrades lost to roadside bombs, endless patrols through hostile streets, the weight of responsibility heavier than any gear, and now dismissed and derided in a place meant to be ordinary and safe. He turned away, shoulders stiff, feeling the eyes of the crowd on his back, some curious, others indifferent, a few quietly sympathetic. The sting of humiliation was sharp, but beneath it surged a quiet fury, an ember ignited by disrespect that would not be extinguished. Jake wasn't just a customer rejected, he was a man affronted, a soldier wounded not by enemy fire, but by the ignorance and cruelty of those who refused to see beyond a uniform. As he walked out of the store, the hum of the mall's speakers playing a cheerful pop song clashed with the storm inside him. The ordinary day had twisted into something darker, a spark that threatened to ignite far beyond the confines of this quiet suburban space. Jake's anger was no longer just personal, it was a call to action, a growing fire demanding justice for the unseen sacrifices too often forgotten. The ripple from that Saturday afternoon at Maplewood Mall grew into a swelling tide of voices, unstoppable and unrelenting. Jake Mason's video, recorded in the quiet steadiness of his living room, cut through the noise of social media clutter with its raw sincerity. He spoke not with anger, but with measured dignity, the fatigue of battle visible in his eyes, yet tempered by a deep, unwavering resolve. "We don't ask for thanks," he said, voice steady but piercing, "only for respect, for every soldier who stands watch so that others can live in peace." The video, shared thousands of times within hours, struck a nerve far beyond the confines of the mall or the small town it sat in. Yet, at first, the mall's response was a faint whisper against the rising roar. Management issued a bland statement describing Ethan's behavior as an isolated incident caused by personal stress, and urging the public to understand that everyone can have a bad day. That patronizing dismissal was a spark in dry tinder. It crystallized the simmering frustration that veterans and their families carried silently for years, frustrations rooted in the eroding respect and invisibility they endured back home. Veteran groups mobilized swiftly, issuing public statements condemning the slight and rallying community support around Jake. Local news stations seized the story, running segments that highlighted the larger national conversation about how society treats its veterans once the uniforms come off. Calls for boycotts of the mall grew louder. Shoppers, many touched by their own family's military history, began posting photos and messages of solidarity. The narrative transformed from one man's humiliation into a collective cry for justice and recognition. But the most seismic shift came when word reached the upper echelons of Jake's military command. Commanders at his base were not content to watch passively as one of their own was publicly demeaned in a civilian space. They understood the gravity. The slight was more than an insult. It was a symptom of a fracture in the social contract, a failure to uphold the honor owed to those who risk their lives for the nation. Their response was swift, unprecedented. The Army's demand was clear and uncompromising. The mall must issue a formal apology and implement comprehensive training for all staff on respect and understanding toward veterans. Until then, no active military personnel or military families would be permitted access to the mall or any of its services. This was not a mere symbolic gesture. It was a partial boycott imposed by one of the country's most respected institutions, effectively shutting down a significant portion of the mall's clientele and influence. This bold stance ignited fierce debate nationwide. Critics argued it was an overreach, a militarization of consumer spaces that blurred the lines between service and civilian life. Others lauded the Army for standing firmly by its people, seeing it as a necessary reckoning with a society that often forgot the cost of its freedoms. The mall's owners, blindsided and panicked, scrambled to navigate the growing storm as sales plummeted and public pressure mounted. Staff meetings grew tense. Local politicians were drawn into the fray, forced to weigh community values against economic realities. Amid the chaos, a fragile hope began to take shape. The conflict forced dialogue between veterans and civilians, between business and the military, between the wounded pride of a soldier and the weary skepticism of a clerk. It was a confrontation that refused to be ignored, compelling the community to confront uncomfortable truths about respect, sacrifice, and the meaning of service in a world growing increasingly disconnected from those who defend it. The storm was rising, but within its dark clouds flickered the possibility of change, painful yet necessary, and perhaps, in time, healing. The air in the conference room was thick with tension the day Maplewood Mall's management convened their emergency meeting. Veteran leaders from across the county had arrived, their presence a silent testament to how far the ripples from one moment of humiliation had traveled. Jake Mason sat quietly at the center, the weight of recent weeks etched into his weary features, but steadied by a quiet resolve. The mall's executives, once dismissive, now wore expressions tight with urgency and apprehension. When Ethan was brought in under supervision, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The young clerk, once smug and defiant, now looked small and uncertain under the collective gaze. His shoulders slumped as the room's gravity pressed down on him, and after a long pause, his voice cracked, revealing a truth none had expected. Ethan confessed that his bitterness stemmed not from hatred of veterans, but from a deep well of personal pain. Years of feeling invisible, trapped in a dead-end job with no prospects, watching the world move past him while he remained stuck. The resentment he'd been fed by cynics and old grievances had boiled over into that cruel moment with Jake, an outlet for frustrations misplaced. Jake listened, the scars of his own battles not only physical but emotional, softening the sharp edges of his own hurt. His reply was measured and surprisingly compassionate. He spoke of how the Army had taught him more than combat skills, that patience, honor, and the strength to forgive were weapons just as vital. He acknowledged Ethan's pain, but reminded him that lashing out at those who serve only deepened divides, and that healing started with understanding, not bitterness. That conversation marked the turning point. In the days that followed, the mall issued a public apology, its tone sincere and unambiguous, a recognition not only of the insult, but of a broader responsibility to foster respect and inclusion. More than words, they acted, launching a comprehensive employee education program about military service, history, and sacrifice, partnering with veteran organizations to hold job fairs aimed at helping those returning from service find meaningful civilian careers, and instituting a permanent discount program for veterans and their families, a tangible commitment to honor their contributions. The Army, watching this transformation unfold, formally lifted the boycott. It was a gesture that transcended policy, a signal that justice had been served, and more importantly, that renewal was underway. Jake's role evolved from victim to advocate, and when he was invited to cut the ribbon on the new veterans program at the mall, his presence symbolized the power of courage meeting compassion. Cameras flashed, crowds gathered, and for the first time in weeks, Maplewood Mall became a place not of division, but of unity. Veterans mingled with shoppers, clerks shared smiles with soldiers in uniform. The mall doors reopened fully, welcoming not only commerce, but understanding. In the quiet aftermath, Jake walked hand in hand with his daughter through the very corridors where humiliation had once shadowed him. The uniform patches on his jacket now seemed less like silent reminders of sacrifice and more like badges of hope. The mall was no longer a battleground for anger and injustice, but a testament to what a community could become when it chose empathy over apathy, courage over silence. His journey had been painful and complex, but from it emerged a powerful truth, that confronting injustice with both strength and grace could inspire not just personal healing, but a collective renewal. Jake's courage, his refusal to be broken by humiliation, and instead to forge it into a bridge of understanding, left a legacy far beyond the walls of Maplewood Mall. It was a story of triumph, of healing, and above all, of hope.